Hello and welcome to another episode of the Builders Podcast, where we bring you the voices of innovators, entrepreneurs, and changemakers from around the globe. I'm your host, Lee, and today we have Gorjan Jovanovski with us. Gorjan is the CEO and co-founder of EarthCare.ai, a platform tackling sustainability and climate intelligence. He's a dedicated environmental advocate and also founded and developed the widely used air quality app EarthCare. Gorjan is also a TED speaker and is featured in media outlets such as BBC, Forbes, Wired, and many others. He is also making strides locally in his native Macedonia as a city councillor in the capital Skopje, representing Green Humane City, a non-political council group supported by 23 NGOs. Gorjan, a warm welcome to Builders. How's it going?
Thank you so much, Lee. It is going well. There's sun outside, and that always gives me energy. I'm very closely connected to the weather, so super happy and super energized to be with you guys today.
It's a pleasure to have you here. I'm also very connected to the weather. It's a sunny day here in Stockholm. The weather has changed. Winter is behind us at long, long last. So
Finally.
Happy days. So let's get started. Tell me a little bit about yourself. Maybe you could start telling us a bit about your background, who you are, what led you to where you are today, to founding EarthCare.ai.
Sure. So 31 years ago, my parents decided to have fun. Okay, not that far back. So I'm a software engineer.
From the very start.
From the very start, the dinosaurs were here. So I'm a software engineer by trade. I've always been intrigued by technology. When I was seventh grade, I taught myself how to code using magazines because I didn't have access to the internet back then. And then ever since I understood that through technology, I could solve problems, starting from personal problems, but then bigger problems that were not yet solved. I decided, you know what, let's do this. Let's study more. Let's figure out things deeper. And that's how I think I got obsessed with computers back in the day. I broke them more than I fixed them. But it's always been a passion of mine. Of course. And I think at the same time, I got to live in the States for a couple of years. We moved with the family away from Macedonia. We lived in Michigan for a while. And I got to join the public school system there. And through the school system, I learned how important nature is and preserving our environment is. It wasn't just, hey, it's Nature Day, so let's go plant some trees, and then we won't talk about it until 12 months later. But it was actually part of the curriculum. That got me very, very interested in sustainability and environment as well. It somehow naturally ended up as an intersection between what I loved doing before, which was technology, and then what I really like doing to better our planet and the world we live in.
Fantastic. And EarthCare.ai, then, what this kind of this moving to America has kind of opened this idea up to you, essentially. Tell us a little bit about EarthCare.ai. How exactly does it function? What does it do?
So the goal of EarthCare is multifold. We're trying to help bring sustainability and climate decision making to companies. So very B2B focused products here. On one hand, we're working with enterprises, with big companies that need environmental data, climate data, natural disaster data to be better prepared for what is about to come, which is the unfortunate reality of the climate crisis. And accessing all of this data and analyzing it is a headache. There's so many data sources, so many different formats. Everyone loves doing something different. It's very difficult to put all of them together for a very comprehensive picture of what is going on and what will happen in the future. And this is where we got to thinking, why don't we have a one-stop shop? Basically, a climate intelligence platform where you can see anything from floods to wildfires, hurricanes, to storms, earthquakes, to droughts and temperature changes. All of this different data into one place so you can run very easy analysis and better understand for risk mitigation, for protection of property, for new market development, and so on. So this is how we started it off. It is, of course, as a startup, an always evolving story. So we're discovering much more different use cases, sustainability being one of them, where we now started looking into that and how we can use AI to better guide companies towards sustainability, because it's always a difficult topic. So it is an evolving story, but it is quite a large platform.
Super. So you're essentially you're feeding companies. It's a B2B kind of product. You're feeding these companies with this timely data, essentially, which they can then kind of take action on, whatever that might be. And we're going to get to that later on. You said you're a startup. When was the company founded? Are there co-founders? How big's the company? Tell us a bit about
The
that.
founding part is so difficult. From a legal perspective, we were founded a year ago, so we barely just celebrated our first year birthday. But with my co-founder, we've technically known each other since high school, which was 15 years ago.
Okay.
We've stuck together ever since. We were working on the EarthCare app that you mentioned, so kind of the previous product. And then last year, we joined Techstars in Berlin. We were invited to be part of the Techstars acceleration program. And during this program is when we decided to pivot into EarthCare and to make it a much more serious endeavor instead of just this mobile app for air quality. Realistically, we've been alive for something over a year at this point, and we've grown. I mean, we got our first office in this last year, which we never had before. We used to work from cafes. We've got our first team as well, so we're 5 people right now. It's no longer just me and my co-founder, and hopefully we'll be hiring soon as we close our funding round.
Fantastic. Okay, so you're in the kind of process of closing a funding round.
Yes, so we're doing our pre-seed funding round. We're hoping it'll close in the next couple of weeks. So we'll get that part over with, and then we can go back and focus full time on what is closest to our hearts, and that is developing this product.
Oh, fantastic. So, I mean, securing funding, any funding for a startup, a tech startup, so it can be challenging, of course. What's your experience been like trying to find this financial backing for a company, specifically for a company focused on climate intelligence or these kind of global crises, right? I think just to give a bit of context, I've been seeing more and more the phrase like impact investing, right, where investors are looking more to invest in startups that focus on, let's say, improving society or the environment. I think I was reading, it was an article in the BBC, I think just the other day, where I saw that it said 74%, I think, of all venture capital funding to Swedish startups, I'm based in Sweden, in 2023 went to these so-called impact companies. Do you see like a similar trend in Macedonia? I think the average in the EU is like 35%, I'm not sure. But do you see like this similar trend in, how's it been? What's your experience been in this this process?
The short answer is fundraising is difficult. It's not as easy as it was probably 2 years ago, 3 years ago. So kind of the fundraising hype of 2021, COVID, that was money was being thrown left and right. And now it's kind of on the complete opposite side of that line on where everyone's quite rigid, and it's much more difficult to raise funds at this point. Raising funds from Macedonia has had its challenges. We don't have VC funds here. We rarely have VC funds in the region. There's only a couple of them. So you'll either end up raising angel money, which is okay if you're raising a smaller amount, but if the moment that you want to raise something larger and you want to go something bigger, then you have to look beyond most likely the Balkans and go into Europe or the US. And for us, what was tremendously helpful was being part of Techstars as an acceleration program, because it opened the door and connections to investors that previously we wouldn't have gotten in contact with.
Right.
And even they find you. We don't actually go out and talk to them. They would keep messaging you and coming back to you and talking to you. And this is how we found this kind of group of investors that we're now closing the round with. And for us, it's always important that what I've seen is you'll talk to a lot of investors. It wasn't like, I'll talk to 5 of them and we'll sign the deal and next week it'll be done. It's a months-long process, multiple year. You got to talk to as many as possible, because it's not only you that are looking for a great investor, they're also looking for you as well. So it's kind of a double interview process. But yes, doing it for Macedonia, harder than you would expect. But that just gives you more challenge to work with and makes you more resilient.
Right. And I was going to say, like, I think being in, let's face it, a smaller country like yours, Macedonia must have kind of made it a little bit harder, at least initially. But these investors that you're close to closing, where are they based? Did you say they're based in Germany, or just you found them via that program?
No, we found them via the program.
Yep.
We have help from outside groups. So might that be Techstars, might that be Impact Hub, for example, which
Right.
also helps us a lot. And then through them, one is a VC based in the Czech Republic. We're also talking to other regional VCs here that we're hoping to get on board. So we didn't strive too far away. We didn't go across the pond yet into the US and look for investors there. But the majority of our focus has been on Central and Western Europe, and the VCs that we've been talking to have been predominantly from those regions.
Fantastic. And obviously, this funding that you're taking in now is going to open up a lot of doors. Hopefully, give raise to a lot of opportunities. Where are you going to be putting this money to begin with? Where are your efforts going to be moving forward? People. Okay.
People.
So
it's
growing the company in terms of people. You said you're 5 now. Is that
yes.
that right? And what positions are they? A lot of people donning many hats, or
of course, it's a startup. It's a startup.
Yeah.
I mean, I try to.
So one day you're doing
keep,
this, one day you're doing that. Yeah.
I try to keep
tomorrow
some
you're
of the
marketing,
people,
right?
Exactly. Oh no, tomorrow I'm cleaning the office, and then I'm doing accounting, and then I'm hiring, and then of course. But I try to keep kind of at least the people that are not co-founders, not me and my co-founder Dragan. I try to keep them more in their own roles, so they can have focus, they can have dedication, and kind of line down. But of course, we have a smaller sales team, so there's kind of 3 of us doing more businessy and sales things. We have 2 guys in the development part, so that just makes the 5 of us all in all. But of course, you need more people. We're working with massive amounts of data. So people that have experience with machine learning, that have experience with AI, you're building your own models to predict or to detect certain weather phenomenon. So we're getting more people expertise there. You're working with huge, and you're targeting huge enterprise companies. So you need specialized salespeople who have knowledge with enterprise experience, sometimes to even break down language barriers, like in Germany or in the DACH region, where you will call up or you will write a text message in English and it'll be more difficult to reach these clients. You need locally. So it is about fully building this team of experts that we need, both from a technical perspective and then business perspective, to be able to go faster. It's not that we can't do it on our own now, but the whole goal is to go as fast as possible. And this is what our main priority and focus will be with the funding.
Nice. You said founded around a year ago. You've spoken a little bit about the funding and how that can be challenging, of course. Are there any other initial challenges in getting EarthCare off the ground? You spoke about it, being a pivot, essentially, spawning from the previous product that you and your co-founder worked on, AirCare. What initial challenges did you face in getting EarthCare off the ground, and how did you navigate them as well?
I think there was a couple. For us, the main one was with AirCare. We were quite successful from a PR perspective. It was great. Bunch of people talking about it, being featured all over the place, getting United Nations awards, presidential awards. It was a wonderful story, and we were making significant impact in the community because it started out as a community project, but it never was a business. It never aimed to be a business.
What was AirCare specific? Did it have like a specific focus in Macedonia, in Skopje, or was it?
It started here. It started locally as a student project, and that was way back in 2014. So it's a very old product. But we grew in the region, then we grew in Europe, and now it's a globally available app with the majority of users being in the US.
Fantastic.
So from that perspective, it was all great. But again, because it wasn't started off as a business per se or as a startup, it was just a project that aimed to help communities know what they breathe. The moment when we thought, hey, we should try and see if we can make a startup out of this and pay our bills and be able to build a team, we realized it was more difficult than we actually thought. This is where we needed this help and assistance. Hence, we got invited to Techstars, those 3-month bootcamp program in Berlin. And there we very quickly realized as well, if we want to go down this startup route, this VC route, where you're talking about big clients, there's big revenue happening, there's big teams and big impact, you can't do it with a small B2C app. It's very, very different. And hence the idea of pivoting into B2B. It was actually a funny story. So So I think it was a month in the TechStars program, and it was 12 startups. And we get a Slack message on a Friday night from the managing director of the of the TechStars program. He said, "Hey, look, guys, we've been following your progress so far. 6 out of the 12 startups here are not innovating enough, are not kind of pivoting enough, trying to understand where their customer base is. So I would really invite 6 of you to really spend the weekend and figure something out." And of course, we were one of the 6 that was tagged. So that
Okay.
put us a little bit in an identity crisis. Like, okay, it doesn't seem to work. We were thinking, air quality, we can sell that data to insurance companies for health, and then they can understand something. But it was very complex, but we weren't getting positive signals.
Right.
So me and my co-founder, we got on call. I was in Berlin. He was in Macedonia here. So it was even a physical distance between us. We said, look, I'll spend the weekend brainstorming on possible ideas. You spend the weekend brainstorming on possible ideas. We won't brainstorm together so we don't influence each other.
Yeah.
At the end of the weekend, we'll sit down, we'll look through our ideas, and then we'll come to a conclusion on what we want to do and how we want to look at a pivot. And I remember we come back on the Sunday. I came up with very drastic ideas from left to right, completely nonsensical. Well, nonsense. The ideas maybe were good, but they didn't make sense for us. I think there was an AI detector for fake reviews was one of the ideas, or I've no clue. I went completely off the chart.
Quite a pivot, yeah.
Completely. And then the co-founder came and he said, "Look, we are experts in environmental data. We've been doing this for years. It only makes sense to stay in that area, but expand our focus and our horizon,
Right.
and understand it in a much deeper sense." And it made it, it kind of immediately turned on a light bulb above my head, because then you have the founder product fit in a way, or founder market fit, where you say, "Hey, look, we know why you guys are doing it because you are the experts there." And I think that's when the pivot started, but then it was trying to discover which vertical to attack. What will the product be like? What are the pain points it's going to solve? So we spend, I think, a whole month calling up different companies, different verticals, different clients, trying to arrange meetings just to talk to them and to understand, is there an actual problem? Are you facing this issue? Will you pay for this solution, or will it be just a nice to have?
Yep.
So we learned a lot about validating your assumptions, validating your market before building anything. And as a developer, it was so difficult. I want to write code. My heart belongs in code. And I can't, because I said, you know what? We're not going to write code until we know that there's a point to doing this.
Yeah, there's something
So I think that was
be built. Yeah.
Main challenge for us, I think, definitely was that.
So you essentially kind of were at this point where you're, like your co-founder said, you needed to basically expand beyond, let's say EarthCare was looking at air pollution, and EarthCare then has basically expanded beyond that into, you've mentioned these kind of weather data, so weather kind of
Wildfires, floods, storms,
travesties.
hurricanes, all of those.
And let's talk a little bit about how the product works. Then you said it's B2B. How does the product serve the customer? You're feeding them this live data and it's all in one platform. Essentially, you're saying. And how does it work when it comes to, how does the product work when it comes to monetization? How are kind of customers using your platform?
The cool thing about the product is that we follow the same technical model that we had for EarthCare. So we re-implemented the same technical model. What I mean by technical model is, how do we source the data and where do we get all this data from? Initially, it's easy to think, we can just use satellite data that's out there and try to stream from it. I mean, there's 101 startups that will be looking into that direction. But we said, you know what? We don't want to rely on satellite data as the silver bullet for our customers. Because if there's a storm, it'll be very hard to detect through satellite data because there's clouds on the ground. I mean, you can't see through clouds with the majority of sensors that are on satellites. Some, yes, but majority, no. So we said, let's follow the same principle which made EarthCare successful. Implement as many data sources as possible from every single level in our atmosphere, starting from satellite, going to radar, going to national observatories, going to IoT devices on the ground, putting all of that to give us both more real-time information and granularity while still having the coverage of a satellite provider. So this is the trick that we used to actually have much better data on the ground and to be able to overcome these problems that using only one data source can fix. And then what we did is we started to do pilot projects with insurance companies. Those were kind of our first verticals that we started to target for risk analysis.
Right.
And they're being very much impacted by climate change and by
Yep.
what's happening here. So we started doing a lot of pilot projects with them to better understand how they want to use our data. Because again, we came to the point where let's build the product this way or that way or a dashboard or API. We said, let's not do it what we think. Let's see what the customers want. We figured out two things, and these are kind of the key ways that we started to develop the product. One was some customers which have the ability to process loads of data, bigger insurance companies, reinsurance companies, they want data. Give me the raw data. So this is where we made a robust API. We're able to create 25 plus data types. So you can get it for any part of the world, any time in the past 10 years, or near real time. So it gives you a lot of information. For other clients and verticals which need more of process analytics and insights into this data, which won't sit down and look at gigabytes or terabytes of raw data, we created a visual platform. We said, okay, here's the visual platform.
You're offering that as a product to that client.
Yes.
Okay.
So instead of giving them raw data, we said, we'll analyze it for you. We'll find the patterns. We'll find the severe events. We'll find how much and flood impacted which area or did a crop field die. So it's more of an analytical platform for other companies that simply don't want to meddle with the raw data, but need the insights from it.
Makes sense. Super interesting that you're able to give that kind of insight to companies that maybe aren't able to receive that raw data, do it themselves. Fantastic. I also saw, I think it was a quote or a client review on your website, I think, and it might have even been from an insurance company, like you were saying. It was talking about how EarthCare's I think it's granular severe weather data, and how using that data that you fed to them, that they were able to locate areas under serious water risk and adjust pricing for their flood policies. I think with up to 50% difference. So it's clearly we see here kind of a clear kind of benefit for companies, how the platform's helping companies in different ways. In this case, price optimization strategies, for example. But are there any particular cases with clients that you're most proud of so far? I know it's kind of still relatively early days, but any particular cases that you'd like to talk about?
I think there's a couple of these that are quite interesting. One you already mentioned, and that actually happened in Sweden. So that was
nice.
Yes, that was in Euro country up there. So we did it there. Exactly. Another one that we were doing was with a client in Germany, for example, where we were helping them model a digital twin of Munich. So they sourced building data from Munich to better understand where buildings are and how high they are and what is the potential damage or the worth, let's say, of the building, while we helped acquire severe weather data, so natural phenomenon data that might happen in Munich, for example, flooding. I mean, Germany had quite a shocker in the last couple of years with floods. So we started to combine these two together to give them an hour-by-hour analysis so they can go back during a certain key weather event and see how this unfolded from basically hour one until the end of the event and see how that was impacting which parts of the city and which buildings that they were insuring. So it was a very interesting twin. They even added a VR component to it, which was interesting. I'm not sure it was the most necessary thing to that, but it took a very interesting turn.
Do you know why?
I think they were experimenting on one end as well, because the innovation team was involved and they were trying to understand how to pull that off as well. It was interesting, but in general, it was very cool to see this digital twin of a city being built and then being able to go hour by hour using our data to very much understand block by block, basically, level of the city and how it was being impacted by certain natural phenomenon. Because then you can understand, again, very quickly help people file claims. They say, hey, I got damaged. The system will tell you automatically, yes, that address seems to be fitting in this model that we're saying, so you can process this claim faster. Or maybe you're 5-10 kilometers down the road where there wasn't anything, but you're trying to kind of piggyback on the claims data and trying to commit fraud. And then there's the fraud component to it, where this data can be used for fraud detection. So it's in a developing story, and more sectors of insurance companies are jumping in and figuring their own ways of using this data, which just kind of opens our eyes even more to what's
Yeah.
possible.
So yeah, essentially, you're enabling companies to use this. Oftentimes this raw data in any way they may see fit. They may have teams that are able to do this for them, of course. Are there any? You spoke about also kind of implementing AI. So essentially, I think you
Mm-hmm.
also mentioned 25 different data types and everything in loads of different regions. So essentially, a lot of data that you can feed these companies with. Are you also, and you've spoken about analytical products that you're offering to these clients, when it comes to AI and potentially these predictive models, let's say, that could also be or will naturally be very, very helpful for these companies. What progress are you making there in the company? Are you kind of offering these predictive models as a product as well?
So we're close to developing our first model.
Okay.
The problem with predictive models a lot of the time is that it's very difficult to look in advance of a year.
Okay.
I've seen companies offering predictive models until 2100. I mean, honestly, it's very,
Mm-hmm.
very difficult right now, even with the most robust AI, to be going off anything more than a year. And this is kind of the industry standard that you're looking at.
Mm-hmm.
What we started to do is thinking about it in a different way. So yes, sure, we will be looking at predictive models very, very soon.
Mm-hmm.
But we started developing a different model, which we call the Y model. What the Y model is there is to explain why things are happening on the ground.
Right.
If a satellite image tells you that a certain field, for example, in agriculture has died,
Mm-hmm.
the field is dead. 2 weeks ago it was fine, now it's dead. I can tell you this, Copernicus can tell you this, another startup with satellite data can tell you this. Great.
Mm-hmm.
But only we can tell you why. You
Right.
mentioned 25 data types. We plug all of these into our model, and then it starts to analyze and understand what are the irregularities that happen in this time frame from when everything was fine on the ground until this
Mm-hmm.
field has died, and trying
Mm-hmm.
to highlight, okay, was it a flooding event? Was it
Yeah.
a signature heat wave? If it was a flooding event, was it because of precipitation or because
Mm-hmm.
the river overflowed?
Mm-hmm.
Because once you have these key moments, you can first of all understand much better how to protect yourself going forward, but
Yeah.
also how to protect your own clients going forward. So
Mm-hmm.
our model is now trying to really understand which and how all of these 25 data types correlate to one another when it comes down to a certain natural event.
Mm-hmm.
And that naturally then brings us to the second part of the model, which we call kind of the seconds before disaster model. Because we know when a flood has happened, we know when a fire has happened. If you're
Yeah.
able to detect what were the conditions before it,
Yes.
then the next time you see these conditions forming again, you can already
Yep.
start raising a red flag and saying, okay, there's a high
Exactly.
risk of something going down.
Yeah. Yeah. And that kind of that ping, then that notification can be obviously sent in advance to these companies who can act, bam,
Exactly.
not stopping obviously the natural disaster, but preempting, taking
It can
action well
happen.
before. Yeah.
It can even start. So right now we are working with the business sector. So yes, for example, if the insurance company, which can call you and say, hey, Lee, like there could be a possible flood, put some sandbags to protect your property. But at
Yes.
the same time, later down the road, this can be implemented in a B2G
Mm-hmm.
fashion where governments will be using this type of data and this type of analytics to say, hey, look, there's a very high risk of fire here. Let's deploy more fire trucks in a certain area to be able to act quicker if something goes down, or to evacuate a certain area if something is, again, if a possible flood is to rise. So
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of implications in where these types of predictive models, very short term, but kind of very, very hyper focused.
Yeah. And you mentioned there that in the future, governments would be using this. I mean, a lot of governments are obviously using this kind of data now, and a lot of companies looking and governments, building and creating their policies based on a lot of the data that's coming in and predictions that might be seen. But your company is obviously it's B2B. Do you see a possibility for your company to offer this or kind of try and focus this product towards governments, potentially starting, say, in Macedonia? And if so, do you think it's possible to for your product essentially to have this kind of tangible change or impact on environmental policies, public awareness, which let's face it, would start from these governmental policies?
In the long term, definitely. In the short term, we understand how difficult it is to work
Yeah.
in the B2G sector. I mean, there's so many different stakeholders that are involved. There's even politics involved. I mean, it's working with government. And as a startup, especially early stage startup, it's very risky to get involved into that because you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket and then end up running out of funding before you're able to close one of your contracts. So,
Right.
and this is something that we understood as well with EarthCare. If you want to make a serious impact, you will need funding. So you need money to make real impact on the ground. That's the reality of the situation. So this is why we said we will be focusing on the sector. We want to make a very successful startup, the one that will allow us to get a great team of people together to grow this, to scale this to different regions of the world. And then once we're able to make this sustainably, start looking into putting this both in the hands of government, but in the hands of consumers as well, like you and me. Because why wouldn't I want to be notified if there's a potential threat to my house or to my business?
Yes.
So there's so many different areas, but we chose to focus on one which will allow us to expand to all of these other ones very controllably and sustainably instead of going down one route and then just hoping that we will close a deal or two. Otherwise, we will go extinct.
Yep. So potentially part of that more long-term vision then. And I mean, it does make sense because not to shift the focus too much here, but you're also involved in local politics, right?
Yes. Yes.
And so naturally there might be that kind of transition, let's say, or rather kind of that your product would go that way. How does your role then as city councillor, right? How does that influence or complement maybe your work with EarthCare?
So on one perspective, it allows me to see the inside of a system, which in a lot of countries tends to be kind of closed. Even for me, it was a black box on how the local government worked or the city council worked before I managed to get in. So it kind of lets me read the source code in a way of how my city works, if not anything else.
Right.
But also exposes all of the problems with what comes with this kind of work. And I think that was one of the main reasons why I said, let's hold off on the B2G side, because sometimes you would find yourself in a predicament where you're trying to explain environmental data and satellite data to organizations that have troubles rotating PDF documents. And you see kind of this balance of understanding the importance and need of these things.
Right.
So sometimes, it reminds me that you need to make a solution so simple to use, so effective, and so that doesn't require scientific knowledge of the data. And this is why we're developing this analytical part, because then you don't need to be a data expert. You don't need to be a scientist of meteorology to understand the data. You can be a policymaker, you can be a governor, you can be a minister, and still understand the threats that might come to your city, to your country, and act on them. So this is why I still believe this analytical and kind of dashboardial, let's say, part of the product is very key to making these insights available and accessible.
Yes. And how's it going balancing the responsibilities then of city councillor, CEO? Do you sleep?
But no, no. I just sold my concept of free time. There's none of this. It's very difficult. I'll be honest. It's very difficult. On one hand, you always feel the pressure and responsibility of being a city council member and being active. Always trying to find better ways of enabling your city, especially when you get a lot of pushback for so many green ideas that it sometimes hurts me and makes me doubt, am I spending my time correctly? Because then I see all the impact I'm doing with the startup globally. And you're thinking, why can't this tiny city move as fast as this startup can? And there's so many people in the city and so little in my startup. So it does require a certain level of balance.
Do you feel like I mean, you have this app that's feeding you all this data. Do you feel like you have the data at your fingertips? You're showing these people that you're working with in this role, and that it's just people are not open to this data, what it's saying. That for whatever reason they're blind to it, or am I being harsh?
No, you're not being harsh. I started off my activism career as a fighter for clean air. So Skopje, unfortunately, and Macedonia as a whole is one of the most polluted countries in Europe in winter times. We used to wear COVID masks before COVID. We were used to them because pollution was so high here, and it was a serious problem. Now, before we launched EarthCare, nobody really used to talk about it. There was a protest here and there, maybe a news story, but it wasn't mainstream. People didn't really have that on top of their minds. Yes, there's something out there. Maybe it's fog. We really don't know if it's smog. Once we launched AirCare as an app that just made this information accessible, so many people realized, wait a minute, this is bad. So we had huge protests, people blocking the streets. We at one point I was standing in front of the government building and holding talks and trying to kind of rally people to understand, look, we're losing significant years of our lives breathing this cancerous air. That was in 2014. Now we're in 2024. It's 10 years later. And I still find it difficult trying to convince people in power to listen to the data. They do not need to listen to me. I do not play a role in this. But the data is there, and it keeps on telling this terrible story. Yet, more often than not, from people in power, it keeps being overlooked. And that's I think what's troubling me the most is that it's not about opinions at this point. It's not about what I think is right or what you think is right. It's about what the data is telling us and how many lives are being lost per year because of this. Exactly. And I think this is where decision makers really need to wake up and say, look, let's put our egos behind us or our political agendas behind us and focus on what the data is telling us and kind of have data-driven governance.
Yeah. So far easier said than done, then essentially. I mean, we're talking about data democratization here, right? You're making it publicly available, making the public aware. You've just been talking about in Skopje. Are there any kind of specific environmental policies or initiatives you've been able to actually advance as a representative in this city councillor role, or have you often or always been met by this resistance?
Look, there's always resistance, especially if we're only 2 out of 45. So we're a very tiny group there, and we're the only ones that's not part of a political party. So we're the only ones that actually are citizen initiatives. And you'll always get pushback for the majority of reasons. But sometimes we manage to find our way around the system and get things done. For example, with the help of volunteers, there have been more than 200 measuring stations for air quality put around the whole city, volunteer ones.
Right.
Measuring stations that the city refused to do themselves. But we managed to figure out ways and get volunteers involved and find funding to pull something like this off, which was great because it gave us a hyper map, let's say, of pollution in the city of Skopje and understanding how the pollution moves through the city and which the sources are. On the other hand, we've been able to, for example, force the city to publicly disclose anytime they want to cut or trim trees in the city, which wasn't publicly disclosed information, so we can prevent the misuse of this policy by, I don't know, an investor who wants to build a building somewhere and then just decides to chop down 10 trees without regard to what that does to our environment. And then the final thing, which I think for me is the biggest win, and unfortunately it's the one that we only have control over and no one else can influence, was the democratization of the work of the city council. Before we came along, it was a black box. You simply didn't know what was going on apart from blog posts from time to time by the city. Now, every time we have a city council session, all of the materials that we get, I publish online with the actual documents, with the titles, how we voted, how the council voted as a majority, with video links to the session. So we created this platform, which we call My City, with the goal of opening all this information up to citizens and getting people involved. Because the whole goal is you and I live in our own cities, and we should be involved in the decision-making process of our city and not just leaving it up to a couple of people. So yes, there have been wins, far less than I would like to, but I tell people it's like a Kickstarter campaign. When you have 2 out of 45, you have a certain bandwidth of things that you can accomplish. The more people are there and are listening and are willing to do it, of course, the more you're able to accomplish.
Right. Yeah. And before talking a little bit more about like the future of your product and the future of this, kind of data and everything, you mentioned in the beginning how when you were in the States, you kind of, I'm not saying that's where you gained or kind of got this intrinsic care for the environment. But you mentioned when you're in the States, you often thought about that. You mentioned kind of also on your website there around some data on these kind of issues, right? So you've got 200 severe weather events per year, $400 billion in damages globally, obviously year over year increases in such events. So your personal inspiration for the idea originated while you're in the States, probably a little bit before as well. Were you aware of like such a large scale of events occurring? And talk to us a little bit about what kind of pushed you or thrust you into focusing on climate intelligence and sustainability, kind of pivoting from hair care.
I wasn't really aware how bad it was. I
Right.
think for me, because of course in the recent years we keep talking about how the world is heating up more and more, and how we're going to miss this goal
Yeah.
that we set on the 1.5 degrees over this standard that we had pre-industrial.
Mm.
I think that got me into research a lot more to understand, hey, how bad is it? How bad might it get?
Mm-hmm.
And this is where I started to understand more of this data and what it was trying to tell me, but also
Right.
the struggle to get concrete numbers if the data wasn't pre-processed for me. If I could
Mm-hmm.
read a research paper on a certain topic, great. But if there wasn't
Mm-hmm.
a research paper on a certain topic, that means I had to fiddle with raw data and trying to find it and combine it. And I think this frustration of not being able to get the answers quickly for
Mm-hmm.
something for me, which was very serious and important,
Mm-hmm.
drove me to say, hey, you know what? This idea that my co-founder came up with makes sense, because then it kind of flashed in front of my eyes. I'm like, I was struggling with this. And now we can actually do something about it and make this data accessible and understandable.
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't want people to focus on trying to analyze the data, but actually work with the insights that the data is telling them, because that's where they
Mm-hmm.
can shine.
Yep.
If I'm a decision maker, I shouldn't be spending my time digging around data and trying to understand it. I should be spending my time creating policies, for example, but only if I have the insights from it.
But any specific challenges in actually extracting the data, the sources of this data, and making it obviously transparency is really key here. So talk to us a little bit about that.
You'll be surprised of how many data formats are.
Mm.
Almost every single national agency for monitoring the environment or meteorological agency loves to use their own format of data.
Right.
They've come up with their own format, which they think is the best, and it's out there. Satellites love to do the same thing. Every satellite provider, their own format. Then you go to IoT stations and IoT networks, same thing. Radar stations, don't even get me started. We very quickly found ourselves in dozens of different data formats that we needed to figure out, how do we read, how do we standardize into one format. Then we're able to analyze and kind of clean that format out of possible hardware malfunctions and errors or data stream errors, which tend to happen more than you think, and then have this clean, standardized data set in one format to be able to analyze on top. So we spent a significant chunk of time improving the system from AirCare to be able to normalize this data, because I think one of the funniest formats of data that I've come across with, because you can imagine data could be in a picture, it could be in a kind of a comma separated value file, it could be in an Excel, sometimes it could be in raw data.
Yep.
The funniest one was, I think I was using some data from a municipality in Germany, and I download a file and it's a text file. I'm like, maybe it's some comma separated value stuff, and I open the text file. No, it was the municipality of Germany drawn out in the text file, an ASCII drawing of it with numbers in certain areas which are supposed to represent the cities. And I'm sitting there, I'm like, first of all, who came up with this idea? And second of all, how do I parse this?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It was hilarious.
What did you do? How did you parse it?
So one way we said it was, okay, we'll try to, if we see the constant numbers being in the constant row and column of each file historically, that means they don't change where the numbers go. So then you can map kind of the column and file to the actual city or the station and say, okay, just look for that row and column in the file and say, okay, that's the number. Otherwise, if that started to change, then I was not ready to build a model to parse and analyze that. We were probably going to skip that. So I've seen some crazy data sources.
Yeah, super. But looking towards the future, then, what are EarthCare's main goals? Would you say in the next, let's say, 5 years? Might be a bit hard to think beyond 5 years, even 5 years. But I'm thinking obviously significant global issues that we have. The temperature rises, sea level rises, carbon dioxide levels, deforestation. I mean, just to name a few, of course. What do you think? What do you think the product at EarthCare will look like over the next 5 years?
For me, the most important part is to democratize access to climate intelligence for any business or consumer vertical. So
Yep.
to make analytics accessible basically for any group of people or any company out there. We might be starting now off with certain verticals and understanding their pain points, but as the product evolves, I want us to be able to make this much more accessible and much more simple to use and much faster because, of course, the more data you get, it's going to become more complicated. And at the same time, developing different key models. For example, one of the ones that we are thinking of working on now with a couple of partners is the hail detection model, because you'd be surprised that there is no sensors to detect hail data.
Right.
There simply isn't out there. You have to rely on social media and people posting pictures to say, hey, a hailstorm happened somewhere, just because it's very different. But if you are able to understand the conditions in which hail forms and you're able to detect it and create models, then that will allow you to come up with new data sets that previously were not available. Right. So I see ourselves literally being kind of I don't like using the kind of synonyms Amazon of something or Uber of something, but basically Amazon of climate data, where you know that if you need access to any sort of environmental and climate data, you come to us. We got your data. We got your analytics on point.
And on that point, what does the competitor landscape look like for EarthCare at the moment?
We've separated it into a couple of categories. Of course, we're not the first ones to come up with the idea of climate intelligence, but we are trying to be the best ones out there that are able to pull it off. You'll have different verticals. For example, you have satellite data providers. They're established, but we discussed already the problems of just relying solely on satellite data. If there's clouds on the ground, it's difficult to read. Satellites don't have all of the necessary sensors. Satellites take time to travel around the world and come back to the same area. So sometimes it could even be days before you get another reading, which is just a whole flood could have happened and gone by in that point. So this is why we said, let's use ground sensors. On the other hand, you have what we call single data providers. So these are companies which are focused on floods or fire or storm. And they do their vertical very well. It's great. But if you, as a decision maker, need to make decisions off of multiple different natural disaster threats, then you come to the problem of now needing to find 5 of these different companies and implementing their 5 solutions and making all of them work together in your own. It becomes a mess again. So this is why we said, let's put it all together under one roof. So yes, there are others out there, and of course, we're battling with both giants and other startups that exist in the marketplace. But I think we figured out something that made EarthCare very successful, and are using the same formula now to make EarthCare an equal success, if not greater.
And any specific vertical that you think will be, the biggest for EarthCare?
Initially, we started off with insurance, just because of the impact that this has on insurance, and we both know that their financial impact is significant. And plus, for a startup, they do have the funding to be able to pay for high value products. So this is why we started focusing there. But we've detected other verticals as well. We have the energy sector, which of course is being impacted by what is going on and their infrastructure.
A big one.
We have logistics, real estate, retail, all of these different verticals. So this is why we hope to establish ourselves with one, but then be able to create and kind of plug in different analytics and visualizations on the data, different additional verticals.
And I guess, it would make sense to kind of, have this initial focus, a lot of key learnings and takeaways from this insurance vertical, as you said, that can be transferred to other verticals too. How do you see, Gorjan, the role of technology evolving in the fight against, climate change and these global environmental issues?
I think it will help us tremendously, especially when it comes down to AI. With the rise and with the availability of both machine learning models, with machine learning as a whole concept, as well as AI, being able to process tremendous amounts of data and figure out things that even a human eye could miss is going to become much more valuable and much more useful in battling climate change. on one hand, you'll have models that are being able to look into the future and try to understand where we're headed and hopefully prevent it. Other ones could start doing simulations. What if we shut down all factories running on coal? How will that impact the world? What
Yeah.
if we do this? What if we?
Yeah.
So that way we'll be able to find maybe the best kind of
Mhm.
low-hanging fruit on how we started tackling this. Because, in my opinion, we as a society, we as humans, still don't have a clear plan going forward in order to tackle climate change. We like to make pledges and promises, but
Right.
in reality, we are not able to meet them, and we
Mm.
always fall behind. So if we
Yep.
want to preserve our planet, if we want to have a place for next generations to live, we must act quickly. And this is where I see the role of technology really helping and guiding us on what to do next.
Mm. And lots happening in the space already. Is there any tech technology or product that you would like to specifically kind of mention or give a shout out to that you think is significantly helping climate change or like raising awareness around the issue? I mean, obviously, we have EarthCare here, but is there anything specific, any tool or anything that you think is really really good and that people should be aware of?
Uh, for me, it depends on who we talk as people. If we're talking about a consumer
Mm,
group of people, then it's all of these apps that are out there. For example, there's even a Macedonian app called Challenger, which helps people change their daily habits and
mhm,
help them understand what they can change from their mode of transport to their mode of waste disposal in order to do their part in tackling climate change.
yep.
So, from that very personal perspective, definitely these apps that kind of help and guide you there. And then, from a higher perspective, this is where we see platforms like EarthCare coming in and saying, "Hey, I'll help the decision makers make these bigger changes out there." And
Hmm.
this is why I say sustainability comes from multiple places. EarthCare aims to be this building block, this kind of ecosystem, which on top of you can already start building different ways and implementations and products using this data
Hmm.
to make sustainability come to life. Because
Hmm.
sustainability is transport, sustainability is heating, energy,
Hmm.
logistics. It's everywhere around us. So it's not that one sector we fix and then the world is fine.
Right.
So it's a much bigger story that involves so many other players.
Mm. That is very very true. Um, what advice would you give Gorjan for yeah, budding entrepreneurs who want to merge technology um, innovation with environmental issues, environmental advocacy?
I would say really try to use the latest cutting edge tech.
Mm,
There's so many things that are happening now. We're in this innovation phase, let's say, of
mm,
technology, which we stagnated for a while. Definitely use the latest technology, especially when it comes to AI and
mm,
machine learning, in order to draw specific conclusions for your areas that you are interested in. There's
mm.
so much open data out there that you can start working and processing with.
Yep.
This is how we started our own journey as well.
Hmm.
Um, and by doing this, not only can you start merging technology with environmentalism, but at the same time, it will start attracting the right people as mentors and investors in your journey.
Hmm.
Because that way you'll start to attract climate investors. You might be talking to impact investors, like you talked about, and finding the people that will be able to fund your journey. Because of course, it's not cheap to do something like that, but
Yep.
there is funding out there, and there's people that will stand side by side and have your same belief that you have.
Hmm. And how do you yourself keep informed and up to date when it comes to all these latest technologies and everything?
Yeah,
Anywhere specific that you would
I'm very
recommend?
old school. I'm very old school. I use Google Alerts.
Alerts. Okay. Mm,
Google Alerts. So
mm,
yeah, of course, I'll scour the web, and I think Google
yeah.
has learned my preferences so far. So even on my phone, I kind of just swipe left and look at all the news, and it
Yeah. Yeah.
knows what to show me. So
Yeah.
I more often than not, I tend to find great news there. But sometimes I even set up these keyword alerts on Google for
Mm,
specific topics, and then once per week or once per day, it'll give me a little summary of all of the things that is found on certain topics, and then I'll just go through them. It's very old school. There's
yeah.
probably a bunch of better methods to do it out there, but for me, it actually gets the job done to a certain extent. So I can stay on
Right.
top of what is the latest model, or what is the latest startup doing something, or what's the latest fund
Hmm.
to say that they've raised funds and now they want to invest in startups. So you still have to keep an eye out there. And then in between me cleaning the office and doing accounting and hiring and sales, I think you should use tools like that to a little bit automate the manual parts of the process.
Yeah, for sure. On that point, you said you were coding when you were much younger. So in between cleaning the office, accounting, and everything, are you doing a lot of coding yourself these days?
Not a lot, but from time to time, yes. And it was funny. Sometimes my co-founder messes with me because he's the CTO, I'm the CEO. So that's how we divide it,
Okay.
even though we're both tech. He messes with me because sometimes sales is very undeterministic. You don't know if your sales pitch is good enough. Could it be better? Could I tweak it more? With code, 2 + 2 is 4. You put them together and you always get the same result, and that's easy. So sometimes when I feel myself getting overwhelmed by the business side of things, I'd lock myself in the office for maybe an hour or two.
Get back to coding,
Get back to coding, relax my mind, be like, okay, everything's fine. We can go back now. So yes, from time to time, I like to jump into code, but more often than not, now I focus on the business side of things and leading that team while my CTO focuses on the other.
That's makes sense, of course. Fair enough. Do you think another question on that point? Do you think you'll be experimenting yourself, dipping your toes into building some of these models that you were talking about? The company's going to be trying to or looking to build these machine learning models into the future. Do you think you'll be experimenting there, or are you going to just rely on the team, on the experts here? And
look, we'll have a great team of experts. I will not make any promises that I wouldn't try to see what's going on there, just out of curiosity.
Here comes Gorjan.
Just walking in, trying to do something next 2 weeks. He's already sold some idea. Now we need to develop it. No. Yes, of course. I always love to kind of dip my toes in latest tech. So, especially because I'm not a machine learning model scientist. I'm not a data scientist. And this is why having these experts on our teams will not only allow the technology to move forward, but will open the business side of things and open our eyes to what is else possible out there. So we can then inquire with possible clients to say, hey, look, will this kind of solution be helpful for you? Because now we know that we can build it if necessary. So definitely, will I be toying with it? I'll definitely be tinkering with some stuff, but most likely I won't be the one building the whole thing.
Fair enough. Gorjan, is there anything you'd like to add before we wrap up here?
I think the last thing that I want for people to know that are now either starting up or thinking of doing their own startup, go for it. Really go for it. No time better than the present. B, it is difficult. So all of this, there's this phrase I won't use, but all this entrepreneurial images and videos that we see online of people drinking pina coladas at the beach with their startups, that's unrealistic. You have to understand that I mean, you could be fooled. Even I was fooled.
That's how I was sold, right? I thought I'd have that pina colada
now
on the beach
look at me not understanding the concept of weekends. Second of all, it'll be a lot of hard work, but it will pay off because you're doing what you like. It's not like you're doing what you like so you won't work a day. No. Let's, again, be realistic. You'll be working and you'll feel the pressure of that. But at the end of the day, you'll be working on your own product. You'll be working on your own terms. You'll be liking this and you'll be building something that you think will be impactful. So I always keep telling people, both locally in Macedonia here, but also globally, go for it. You don't want to be left with what ifs. If it fails, it was a learning opportunity. You understood better. You can always go back to a regular job. But at the same time, try build something yourself. It is a wonderful experience.
Very, very good. Tips, Gorjan. So thank you very, very much. And I think, that wraps up another episode here on Builders. A huge, huge thank you to you, Gorjan Jovanovski. I hope I pronounced that correctly.
Very well.
Thank you so much for joining us today and sharing the work being done at EarthCare and your passion. I could really feel it. It's like I could, tangibly feel your passion for sustainability and the innovative use of technology at EarthCare and how it's being used, I think, towards contributing to a healthier planet, hopefully, moving forward. So really, really a big thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Appreciate it as well. It was a pleasure. I hope I gave a little bit of insight into what we're doing and kind of inspired people to do follow kind of their own startup dreams. And then I look forward to seeing all of us in a greener and cleaner future.
Me too. And to our listeners, we hope today's conversation inspires you to think about how you can leverage technology in any fight against any pressing issue. Please don't forget to subscribe to our podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts to catch all of our episodes. And for now, keep on building and see you next time. Cheers.